Thank you, Professor Sachs. Well, I think we have about half an hour of question and answers. I think we have very much things to digest from Professor Sachs' insights. Basically, I think there are a few things I want to recap about what Professor Sachs has said. He sets the context upon which he asked the question. He started by saying why some countries made it, why some countries don't make it. So the issue of education comes out. Then he talked about the context, upon which we need when we want to have economic growth, economic development, peaceful development. We need certain things as well. So behind that context, he was referring to several challenges, which globally we all face, and no difference from the ASEAN countries here. So things like the environmental challenge was significantly mentioned by him, and various types of environmental challenges. And ASEAN countries face these challenges, whether now or to the future. The role of the great powers as well, and moving from the unipolar world of hegemony and moving to the multipolar world, what does it require? And this is, in fact, a very important transitionary phase that all countries face. So the third point, the third context he talked about was technological advancement in AI. And again, the necessary tool for economic development. So these fundamental challenges in technology will cause much disruption and displacement. So let me just begin by asking Professor Sachs one question while you are all preparing your questions. I already see some hands raised for it. So this year's Nobel Prize was won by Mocker, Philippe Agnon, and Peter Howitt. So one important contribution that they have made is that the success and the progress of a country's economy depends very much on innovation, and with it, the notion of creative destruction. It suggests that the existing paradigm of countries' growing economic model cannot be just a smooth trajectory based on what we used to study in textbooks, accumulated capital, productive capacity, and the given technology. Where and how that technology manifests itself often left out, taken as given and so on. So the missing link that they come up is innovation and creativity. But this seems to suggest that also the success of any economy depends very much on, not state-directed intervention and economies being free. So I would like to ask you, what is then the role of the state, and how can reconcile? For example, many countries talked about we need state intervention to provide the catalytic for growth. So this, I think, will be very relevant for ASEAN countries.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you very much. The Nobel Prize this year was won for a series of mathematical models that captured, as you say, an idea of Joseph Schumpeter, who was an economist, academic at Harvard in the middle of the 20th century. He said, by the way, famously in his life, that Schumpeter said, I want to achieve three things in life. I want to be the greatest economist in the world. I want to be the greatest horseman. He was, of course, Viennese. And I want to be the greatest lover in Vienna. And he said, I've achieved two of the three, but I won't tell you which. But he did achieve greatness as an economist in a book called Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy, written in 1942 in the middle of World War II. And he depicted capitalism as creative destruction, meaning that it was based fundamentally on technological advance, but that advance also destroyed the previous incumbents of a particular sector. So you could think electric vehicles is an example of creative destruction. Xiaomi and BYD, maybe Tesla, will survive, but whether Ford Motor Company survives is another matter. but the old industry of internal combustion engine won't survive. Now, what is free about creative destruction is that the society has to allow the old to decline to make room for the new. Whereas if the political order protects the old rather than making room for the new, you don't get the technological advance. And this, in essence, is what the Trump administration is trying to do right now to protect the U.S. market in automobiles. He has no interest in electric vehicles. So inside the U.S., he has slashed any incentives for electric vehicles. And externally, he's putting on high tariffs to keep low-cost, high-quality Chinese electric vehicles outside of the U.S. market. In other words, he's preventing creative destruction. And what will happen? What will happen is, if this continues, the U.S. auto industry will disappear, and China will dominate the world in vehicles. And ASEAN, if it's smart, will be producing a lot of Chinese electric vehicles in joint ventures in the next 15 or 20 years. So invite them to Indonesia, Malaysia, Laos, and so forth to produce cars in ASEAN, because all the factories will not be in China by any means. So this is the interesting point. And what these modelers did this year was show you could model in a very nice way Schumpeter's point. It does raise the question, where does the innovation come from? And innovation is a tricky business, because when you create an innovation, or as Paul Romer, another Nobel laureate a few years ago, said, when you create a blueprint for a new tool, that becomes a replicable good. So it is part of the global commons, that knowledge. But if it's part of the commons, how do you reap the rewards of the innovation? And there are several answers to that. But one of them is patents, for example. You protect your intellectual property over a period of 20 years. That's one answer. It doesn't work for scientific advances, though. Einstein did not patent E equals mc squared, and he wasn't able to patent general relativity, so everyone else had to use classical Newtonian mechanics, except if they paid Einstein. Everybody got to use Einstein's discovery for free, thank you, because we could not afford to patent basic knowledge. You're only allowed to patent utility of new tools, and though that principle is very often violated in actual patent practice. But there's another way to generate public goods, therefore, and that is government support for the scientific advances or for the early stage development. So there has never been purely a market-based mechanism for innovation, though the search for profits can lead to innovation, and then you hide the innovation as a corporate secret, as a trade secret, or you just stay ahead of your competitors by innovating faster, even as the information flows out and you're better at it, or you have a patent, or the government finances the innovation that otherwise the market would not finance. And in actual practical history, we have mixed systems for high innovation. Since the end of the 19th century, innovation has come from government support. It's come from universities paid for by government. It has come from corporate monopolies like AT&T, which ran Bell Labs, which gave us the transistor in 1947. It's come from patent rights. It's come from trade secrets. It's come from stealing other people's ideas. It's come from all sorts of directions. So the idea that this is a market phenomenon is not right. it's an ecosystem, we know. Some of you are involved in financing the innovation ecosystem. And there will be a government player. There will be maybe Temasek. There will be some other investors. There will be maybe a science foundation, maybe the universities, maybe a corporate startup, maybe some private venture capital, and so forth. And the success is designing that ecosystem. In the US, the rhetoric, when I was trained in economics, was we have a market economy. Well, nonsense. Nobody has only a market economy. And we were told we don't have industrial policy. Well, nonsense. We have pervasive industrial policies of all sorts, especially in innovation. In 1945, Franklin Roosevelt's science advisor, spurred by Roosevelt, who I repeat was our greatest president. Most of our presidents are mediocrities. A few are really ignoramuses, and a few are really great people, and Roosevelt was in the great category. But Roosevelt asked in 1944, how do we make all this boom of technology during the war available for the civilian economy? And his science advisor, Vannevar Bush, wrote a book called Science, the Endless Frontier in 1945, which said we have to commercialize this, make it open, distribute radar and other things that came from the wartime efforts. Semiconductors was a wartime advancement, computers and so forth, and make this available. And they developed the National Science Foundation, scholarships, linkages of government contracts to the private sector. Silicon Valley was made by the space program in the 1960s, which bought up so much of Silicon Valley's output by the space race in the 1960s, and so on. The internet is a Defense Department project, of course. The genetics sequencing was a government program. And the list is endless. So it's always been partly government supported. Last year's Nobel Prize was for three people who said the US will inevitably win the innovation war because it has an open system and China will lose. I doubt it. I really doubt it. Nobel Prizes are not awarded for accuracy, by the way. They're awarded for interesting things, but not for their accuracy. In my mind, China has an incredibly dynamic innovation system. It is a mixed system. When you ask where did electric vehicles come from, first it started with a Chinese government intention to support this sector, declared, for example, in the Made in China 2025 program, very successful program. But then it came from 400 private, entrepreneurial, heavily competitive electric vehicle producers, many of them phone companies and others that are getting into the car business for the first time and completely outcompeting Ford, GM, Mercedes, doing things that they shouldn't be doing because the incumbents are protecting their defunct technologies rather than competing in the new technologies. So I'm very bullish on Chinese innovative capacity. It's the #1 region of the world, the #1 cluster geographically, as measured this year in the report of the World Intellectual Property Organization, is Shenzhen, Guangdong, and Guangzhou and Hong Kong. So that innovation cluster is ranked #1. Silicon Valley is 4th on the list right now. And I think that that's actually correct. One thing that China has that the United States doesn't have is that China not only innovates, but it actually produces, whereas the United States innovates and it outsources to this region. That's not so effective, actually, because there's also a feedback from the production back to the innovation. And China has a production innovation system that the United States does not have. So China is driving down costs in a way that the United States could only dream of doing. And that is partly because of the direct feedback from innovation to manufacturing cycle back to innovation. And that has been lost in the US context.
Okay, that's a very thorough, very answer. And now I think I will open to the floor. I see 2 hands, 3 hands. So I think Mr. Anthony Teo will go first. Wait, and then we'll collect 3 questions. How about that in one go? Please make your questions brief and to the point.
Jeffrey Sachs. I went to my 55th reunion, and they told me that you got to watch out for this radical economist called Jeffrey Sachs.
Good.
And I'm so happy to hear you, because you are more than radical. I have a question, but if I could just get on to your 30 years ago, yes. And about that time, Gore was running for president, and he had a debate with the third party from Texas, and he was recalling the Smoot-Hawley proposition, why we must have free trade. And he lost the election. But Bush came in, and now, 25 years later, we have moved all the way to the other way, where it's anti-Smoot-Hawley. It is a tariff war.
Yeah.
And we believe in all the free trade, and we are the most promiscuous free trader. We have about 70 to 90 free trade agreements. And at the end of it, you say the number 1 proposition. The number 1 proposition is worse, because Trump has commercialized the presidency.
Yes.
Never done before. And how do you put that angle into your number 1 proposition? Because if the Constitution itself is at risk, then we depend on people like you to go on YouTube, bully pulpit, to speak on our behalf. Because we are only one voice. When our DPM went to Washington, D.C., he did not get too much of high-level attention. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Okay, we have the second one, Dr. K.K. Pua. Here first.
The greetings from the class of 76 from the Harvard and to your Mrs. Sonia. My question is, you have portrayed convergence theory and a bit of a diffusion theory. So how do you explain the China phenomenon? You know, with the Pax Seneca, would it be the same as Pax Americana or Pax Britannia in the past? And that's what we in this region fear, you know. And so you have to let us assure us that it will not be the same story. It will be played all over again, you know. So
Chinese domination.
Yes.
Pax Seneca, sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't hear that. Okay, got it. Pax Seneca, got it. Perfect.
Okay. All right, thank you, Mr. Louis.
Thanks. Louis Tae Keong, Public Policy, Asia Advisor, Lead Consultant, and also former ASEAN policymaker. Prof, you have compellingly described to us our era as a retreat from the rules-based order back into a 19th century style of big powers imperialism. So where spheres of influence and military might are again dominating statecraft. So my question really is about the tragic inertia of the war in Ukraine. If we accept this paradigm, then that we are now in a period defined by contested spheres, does this grim diagnosis also contain the seed of a pragmatic, if unsatisfying, solution? Rather than pursuing a maximalist victory for either side, which seems to carry existential risk, could the only viable off-ramp be a negotiated settlement that explicitly, if reluctantly, acknowledges these renewed spheres of influence? And what would be the role of neutral economic powers, perhaps from the global south, in mediating such a fundamentally political agreement that the current belligerent seems politically unable to reach on their own? Thank you.
Okay, would you like to take this three first?
Yeah, these three. Thank you. Let me say a few more words about the U.S. scene right now. As you know, President Trump rules by decree. Almost everything that has been done and almost every controversial action that has been taken has been by his decision alone. There has been the fewest numbers of legislative acts of any modern presidency in the first part of this second term. And there has been the most executive orders. And if you go on the website of the White House and look at the executive orders, they all pretty much start the same way. By the powers invested in me as President of the United States and under the International Economic Emergency Powers Act, I declare an emergency. And the emergency could be fentanyl, the emergency could be a trade deficit. It's mind-boggling how flagrantly illegal all of this is and how flagrantly dangerous all of this is. From my point of view, everything that Trump has done about international trade is a gross violation of the Constitution, because Article 1, Section 8 of our Constitution declares that all duties are the responsibility of the Congress. Trump does not have the authority to remake the trade system. And if he tried to do what he's doing right now, it would not pass Congress, because there would be such competing interests and outcry in the public among consumers that this would not pass. The two lower courts in the United States have ruled what Trump has done illegal. We had a case in the International Trade Court, which is the unique court for taking on trade disputes, and they said Trump exceeded his authority. That went to the Circuit Court of Washington, D.C., the Court of Appeals, and they said by a 2-to-1 vote that exceeded his authority. The dissenting opinion in that vote is the case that many on the Supreme Court will adopt. The dissenting vote said we should defer to the commander-in-chief, because this is a matter of national security, the president tells us. This is an emergency, and who are we as the courts to second-guess that? So the minority opinion defines what many on the Supreme Court will decide. The court is probably among the 9 votes right now, 4 against Trump, or Trump's powers, 4 in favor, and the Chief Justice being the swing vote. Now, for Sonia and me, the interesting point is the Chief Justice is our classmate. So we're waiting to see what he learned in college. Did he learn that we have a democracy and a rule of law? Or did he learn that you just better follow authority? And I don't know what this is going to be. But if the Supreme Court rules with Trump, it's pretty much the end of our democratic system, which is already way down the line of disappearing. Why is it disappearing? Because the U.S. is an empire. It's very hard to run an empire on democratic terms. Our country's run on secrecy. Foreign policy is completely in the hands of secrecy, not public debate or discussion. The Americans have no role to say about the Ukraine war or the war in Gaza or an attack on Venezuela. No one asks, cares at all of those who are making the decisions. And since that's so much part of the work of empire, it is what the Americans became. The system also became profoundly corrupted. Campaign contributions are about $16 billion per cycle, election cycle now. And that means it's not a lot of money to buy the US, by the way, because you buy a multi-trillion-dollar government and you buy the levers on a $30 trillion economy, so it's very cheap. And Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and others figured out this is cheap. This is, Elon can do that by himself, and he did. And he stood up there and he told the voters, I give one of you $1 million every day. This is rounding error for him, but it's a compelling democratic politics, if you will, or populist politics, I should say. So the system is wrecked in this way, and we don't know whether it will return. The Roman Republic was weakened in the 1st century BC. By traditional historical accounts, it ended in 27 BC when Augustus declared himself, or Octavian declared himself Augustus Princeps, and it became the Roman Empire. And it never returned to the Roman Republic. So I don't know whether we'll ever return to true democratic governance. It's not automatic at all that we will. It's not a good way to run the country. On Pax Sinica, just very quickly, I'm an optimist about Pax Sinica. You all know your neighborhood well, but from my reading of history, China never wanted overseas empires. It never bothered this region, really, for thousands of years. China was the all-powerful hegemon of Asia for at least the last millennium up until the 19th century. And amazingly, and I'll take it from the end of the Yuan dynasty, the Mongols, from 1368 up until 1839 when the British invaded China. From 1368 to 1869, China never tried to invade an overseas territory. And China did invade Vietnam once in 1410 AD. And there was a 16-year war, 1410 to 1426. That's all. In Europe, everybody fought everyone else every year. I don't think there was a quiet year in Europe. They were at war nonstop, the British and the French for hundreds of years. And this is a very big difference. China did something unimaginable in 1434. It had the biggest naval fleet in the whole world. It commanded the Indian Ocean. It could reach East Africa. It could have discovered the Americas. It could have circled the Cape of Good Hope. It could have crossed the Pacific. It could have done all those things. Instead, the Mandarin court of the Ming Dynasty ended it, said, what do we need ships for? We have everything here. And our big problem is coming from the north, coming from the steppe region. So we better defend against the steppe region. And even China's expansion in the 18th century, during Qianlong's rule as emperor, was not really Chinese. It was Manchu victories over the Mongols, over Xinjiang and over Tibet. But that was a fight within the steppe region, countries, not peoples, not Han Chinese invasion abroad. I think the history of the Chinese tributary system is China wanted respect, always. If you bow down to the emperor as the celestial ruler, that was enough. China didn't really ask for material tribute, unequal trade, extraction of resources, colonies, land, conquests, never. Now, does that prove that China would not? Almost, in my view. China's got enough things to do with its 1.4 billion population, and it's boxed in on three sides, pretty much making it very difficult to do anything else. So I'm not very worried. My own view, I don't mean to be flip about it, but the militarization of the South China Sea, to my mind, is a defensive reaction to the US Navy, not a provocation by China. The US flaunts the idea of choke points on China's sea lanes. It flaunts them. It's in our textbooks. The first island chain is an invention of John Foster Dulles in the early 1950s. How would America like if China declared that the US can't reach the Caribbean because there's a first island chain to prevent the US from reaching the Atlantic Ocean? Are you kidding? But that's American formal policy. This is really not right thinking in this world. So when China responds, I understand why China responds. And I think we should stay out of the way. Of course, China does not then have freedom to abuse the rest, but frankly, why would China? They don't need colonies, land. They do need trading partners and places for investment, and that's good. That's a win-win proposition. So I personally believe in a peaceful region here that is not dependent on US policing. I think the US makes the noise, but I don't think it helps the peace, personally. This is my own view. And similarly with the Ukraine war. There would not have been a Ukraine war if the United States had not pushed NATO enlargement after 1992. And the story there, very, very briefly, is quite simple. After World War II, there was no treaty to end World War II. What the Soviet Union said after World War II was that Germany should be demilitarized and neutral. And that made perfect sense because the Soviet Union lost 27 million people to Hitler's armies in World War II. And so the Soviet Union wisely said, demilitarize and neutralize this country. The United States said no. To the contrary, the US said, we now arm Germany because we want to defend against communism. And so an ideological approach rather than a pragmatic, realist approach was taken. And the United States said we will rearm Germany, create NATO, and get ready for a war with the Soviet Union, which was not what the Soviet Union wanted. What the Soviet Union wanted was security against another invasion coming from the West. But the US said, no, what the Soviet Union wants is expansionism, and we will have a divided Germany. In 1990, because of Mikhail Gorbachev, who was a man of peace, and in my view, the greatest statesman of our age, actually, and somebody I admired tremendously, not liked in his country because he's remembered for the collapse of the Soviet Union and for high inflation, but he was the greatest statesman of the time, except that he trusted the US. He said, I want to end the Cold War. And so he ended the Soviet military alliance unilaterally, the Warsaw Pact. And when Helmut Kohl said, we want to reunify Germany in 1990, the Western countries told Gorbachev, we will not take advantage. If Germany reunifies, we need a treaty because we never had a treaty to end World War II. So we need what was called the 4+2 treaty, which was to end the war and reunify Germany. And in that context, on February 7th, 1990, the German Foreign Minister, Hans-Dietrich Genscher, and the US Secretary of State, James Baker III, told Gorbachev the same thing: NATO will not enlarge 1 inch to the east. And then Helmut Kohl was told that. Helmut Kohl told Gorbachev that on February 10th, 1990. That was the basis of German reunification. Then the Soviet Union ended in December 1991. I was in the Kremlin that day, by the way. It was, in fact, with President Yeltsin. And he told us the Soviet Union is ending. The United States immediately decided it wasn't bound by any agreements. We're now the sole superpower. We can do what we want. So already in 1992, they began to plan for NATO enlargement, a complete and reckless cheat. And President Clinton, in 1994, January, announced it. He was a very inconsequential leader. Not very deep, not very strategic, not very knowledgeable, not very responsible. And so he began NATO enlargement. And NATO enlarged first to Hungary, Poland, and the Czech Republic in 1999, and then in 2004 to Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Bulgaria, Romania, Slovakia, and Slovenia, 7 countries. And the Russian leadership said, stop this. You told us none, and now it's already 10. And the United States said in 2008, we're not done, and you have no say about it. And we never promised you anything, which is a blatant lie. And so the United States in 2008 said, we're going to go to Ukraine and to Georgia at the Bucharest NATO summit. That's why we have this war, because Russia said no. But what was added to this was in 2002, the United States unilaterally abandoned the anti-ballistic missile treaty, which was a great destabilizer, because the ABM treaty was for mutual deterrence of the nuclear forces. And the US started putting in anti-ballistic missile systems in Poland and in Romania, the Aegis missile systems, and the Russians said, wait a minute, you're destabilizing the nuclear framework and you're expanding NATO. One more thing brought us the war, and that is the Ukrainians elected a president that wanted neutrality because Ukraine is in between the West and the East, or in between Russia and the West, I should say. And so they elected a president that wanted neutrality, and the United States does not like neutrality, as you know. This is a problem for here, too. The US doesn't like neutrality. That's an imperial idea. We don't like neutrality. You're either with us or you're against us. So the US helped to overthrow that president on February 22nd, 2014. It was a coup, and the US was an active part of the coup. That's what caused the Ukraine war. By the way, the media say everything I said is propaganda. And I can tell you, everything I just said is absolutely true. But we live also in a world of government spin. And I told you who owns the media. And it's a symbiotic relationship between the media and the security apparatus. And so what we hear in the West is simply not true. So this was a war that was provoked, absolutely, by US unilateral actions. I tried for 3 years to get in 700 words to this effect to the New York Times. And I said, it doesn't even have to be in print, just put it online once. They wouldn't publish even 700 words by me to retell this story, because it's not interesting, apparently. So this is where we have problems. If we don't behave, we're going to end up blowing each other up. And this is where we need prudence of the major powers. And we need honesty and maturity. And it's not about Russia's attitude to Ukraine, it's about the United States' attitude to Russia that's at stake here. And the US completely miscalculated. And I know it because I heard it from senior US officials for 20 years. They said Russia's a pushover. We can do what we want. Who's going to stop us? And the answer was the Russian government. And that's what they got wrong. And so we need to be careful. And I can say to the diplomats here, it's important to help educate the Americans. Please. It's important for the world. We need some truth-telling because that way we'll stay safe. And I can say as an American, maybe I'll end here, and I know I go on way too long. America is the safest place in the whole world. Nobody could conceivably invade the United States. No one can threaten the US with an invasion. There's no threat at all to the United States except two things. One, internal collapse, and second, nuclear war. And we should be able to avoid both of them. So it's unbelievable that we're in a country of fear where we have the least to fear of any place in the world. If you're the US and your two neighbors are Canada and Mexico, you're pretty damn safe.
Okay, I'm mindful for time. Join me again to thank Professor Sachs for his very candid comments on everything. And I think the most important thing that we hear is that we need a peaceful world in order to ensure economic prosperity. I mean, that's very important. If we don't have that, we are not going to achieve economic prosperity. The second thing is cooperation, talk, right? So thank you, Professor Sachs.